Hi, I'm Mark Sawicki. I'm a clay animator, and I'd like to share with you some of the techniques I use to design and create cartoon characters. Now for that, we're going to need some clay. My favorite clay is polymer clay. I have some over here. This clay is terrific in that it's very plastic and pliable and can be baked to a permanent hardness in a home oven. You don't need a super hot kiln, only a home oven that can bake this clay at a temperature of about 275 degrees. It's that simple. I'll give you a hint though. Never ever use a microwave oven. It causes the resins to boil and bubble and smoke and completely ruin your piece. What you want is nice, even heating, very slow, take your time, conventional oven for this clay. Now there are many brands of polymer clay on the market. One of my favorites, and the clay that we'll use today, is Sculpting. This is a very soft polymer clay that comes in bulk white. The colored version is called Sculpting 3. It comes in a variety of hues and is sold in these small packages. If you like to paint your pieces, all you need is the white clay. I myself like to use the colored clay and paint details in it to enhance the look. The next thing I often get asked is, what type of tool do I use to sculpt with? Oh gee, tools. I mean, because when you go to your typical art store, there seems to be a plethora of tools. There's this one and that one, and what do they do? And they're quite mysterious. But I'll tell you right now, the best tools you have are right here. Most of the techniques that we're going to learn today just use the fingers. So here I'll show you. Here's a typical assortment of tools, and they're quite extensive, as you can see here. Now you can obtain these little plastic tools at your arts and crafts store. These instruments have little cutters and pokers that can be useful, and the variety of shapes can be advantageous. Now for me, I find that the tool I like most is a little pin poker that you can use for making little holes and wrinkle lines, and the other is a chopstick or a knitting needle, which is great for making big indentations and smoothing the clay. Now this particular tool here is good that it's a poker on one side and a paddle on the other, so you can flip it around and quickly do two different operations. Now my favorite tool is this one. It's not really a sculpting tool, but a machinist scribe. I like it because it's kind of a James Bond kind of tool. I mean, ooh, look at that. It's a nice tapered poker on one end, and on the other end is a rounded ball for making smooth craters, and it has this wonderful knurled texture pattern on the handle that's great for texturing the clay. You just roll it over the clay, and you get some alligator skin. Here, let's give it a try. And I mean, look at that. The basic rule is whatever works for you is okay, even if it isn't a standard store-bought sculpting tool. Now another useful gimmick is the texture sponge. Here are some that I made from silicone rubber. Poured rubber over an orange for this one, and I used a lemon for this one. Makeup artists use these a lot for simulating skin texture. After you've made your basic form, you just apply the texture sponge and you get instant detail. It would take you forever to sculpt all these little bumps, but these little rubber stamps make it easy. Now, you can also use pieces of cloth if you want clothing texture. Now, the other important tool that you will find that will help support your clay is the wire armature. So we'll bring some of that over to you here. This is the type of wire that I like to use. It's called alloy wire. It's an aluminum wire. I use it a lot in animation, but it's ideal for armatures as well because you can bend it. It's very, very soft and pliable. It will stay where you bend it, and you can make nice little armatures here that you can wrap the clay around. And it will support it, and it'll be very good. The other handy thing to have is a chunk of aluminum foil, because with the aluminum foil you can use this to beef up certain parts of the armature. There we go. This is very useful because we can beef it up so we don't have to use so much clay. This figure here, for example, would be very expensive and heavy if she were made of solid clay, since she has such a bulky costume. So I covered the armature with a combination of foil and styrofoam, then added a thin layer of Sculpey to finish the piece very inexpensively. Now, after your sculpture is finished, you're probably going to want to paint the piece. Now, it gets very confusing and expensive buying paint, so what I suggest you do is purchase a student kit of paints of all your basic colors, like these over here. Primary colors: black, white, red, green, blue, and yellow. You can mix these water-based paints together to make any color of the rainbow, and they work very well for this type of clay. The most important tip is to never use these enamel paints. Now, these paints were designed for those styrene plastic kits like little model cars and whatnot. Don't want to use that. This paint will attack the polymer clay and make it permanently sticky. So don't do that. Stick with the acrylic paints. Water-based acrylic paint, it's fine. All the colors you need, and it won't attack the polymer clay. Now for brushes, I would suggest getting an inexpensive assortment of nylon brushes. This particular kit has a range of brushes from the tiny zero liner brush, which is great for painting eye detail, on up to the number 6 round brush for broader strokes. Now it's time to talk about sculpting. You go to any grade school and you give a kid a hunk of clay, and I remember this distinctly when I was, in first grade or something. Here's a hunk of clay, and they say, okay, make a snake. So the kid grabs a big hunk of clay, and the first thing you do is make a snake. Now you look at this snake, and it has a lot to be desired. Now why is that? It's an okay snake, but it's quite lumpy, isn't it? It's got thick parts, thin parts. It looks like a kind of a sickly worm more than a snake. Now when I was in first grade, I was kind of a little shy, a little timid, and I didn't grab a big hunk of clay and do that. It just seemed such a violent kind of a movement. So I just took a little bit of clay and I just used my little fingers like this and made a little snake. But it was interesting what I discovered when I did that, because if you look at this snake, you'll notice that if you just use your thumb and forefinger, you get a much more even snake than you do just using the palms of your hands. Now why is that? That is because the palms of your hands have hills and valleys. When you do this, you can't help but have an uneven surface and lose all control that you have. However, these delicate, sensitive fingertips of the thumb and forefinger are very flat, and you have a great deal of control, and you can get a very smooth-looking snake. When I was a kid, I loved science fiction movies, especially the ones that involved really huge monsters attacking tons of army men. And I would create these scenarios in clay. That was my childhood toy. Well, I'd make my monster pretty quickly, but when you need a whole bunch of army men that are a lot smaller than the monster, I didn't know enough, or I wasn't skilled enough to be very detailed. So my first little army men essentially looked like that. You go, what is that? That is a blob of clay. You may say that's a blob of clay, but what you have there is the most basic representation of the human form, a cylinder that is taller than it is wide. Now the great thing that I learned about making these army men is that it was kind of an invisible exercise for sculpture, because as you make these, it trains your eyes and your fingers to make perfectly uniform pieces of clay that are identical. So you learn about proportion, you learn about uniformity. You can learn to make things twice as big, twice as wide, twice as small. You're making these little simple things, and you are learning through this little feedback loop how to make things uniform and consistent. So it's a great confidence builder. Now the other handy thing is you look at that and you go, well, what does this have to do with sculpture? Yeah, it's consistent, but if you look at that little army man, what you see there is not merely a blob of clay, but it could be potentially a finger, a thumb, a nose, a toe, maybe the start of a leg, who knows? It could be anything. It is the basic building block of sculpture. Now we'll show you how. And what we are going to do is make a boxing glove, because I can't think of anything funnier than a boxing glove. I mean, it's this huge mitt that's, just imagine playing the piano with boxing gloves. It's inherently funny. It's quite funny. So we'll start out with a blob of clay. This is our regular white Sculpey clay. And we will make our cylinder. Notice how I'm doing this. I'm just rolling the clay between my thumb and my forefinger. But on the one end, I'm rolling it a little bit thicker. Remember we were talking about proportion? You can make a thicker cylinder and a thinner cylinder. Well, there you go. So there you are. We're rolling this thin cylinder and the thicker one. Now what we have essentially done is made the arm and the boxing glove. Now to make the boxing glove, you press down on the cylinder and you've got the mitt of the boxing glove. Now, what about the thumb? Remember those little soldier people we were making? We're going to do that again. Going to make a little soldier, flatten it out, and then we're going to attach it to the boxing glove. You just stick it on there, then using just your thumb, we smooth it in on all sides, and now you've got your basic glove. Round it out, smooth it out, and there you have it. Now a lot of boxing gloves, they have that little cuff on them, so we're going to make a cuff. Now this is where the uniformity of practice comes in. What we want to do is make a little tube of clay that will surround the arm. So let's grab some more clay, and again we will make our little soldier, except we'll make him a little bit longer, and we'll keep making him longer and then keep practicing putting it around the clay. Yeah, that will completely circle our little arm there. And once we've done that, then we're going to use the little technique that I call layering in clothing. We have a little cylinder and we flatten it just by pinching. And we pinch the corners to make them sharp. And now we wrap this around our boxing glove. We'll start at the base there. We wrap that around. And we smooth it as we've done before. And we keep smoothing it on either side. And look what we've done there. We've gotten ourselves a little boxing glove and a mitt. And we can bend the mitt over, bend the boxing glove over, and bang! We have our very first sculpture just done by using these little tubes. Now what I'd like to do is to enhance our boxing glove and go on to make a cartoon hand. Now we're going to add some fingers here, and we'll add some color to show some basic concepts. Now what we're going to do is we're going to have a hand, which will be flesh colored. Then we'll have a white collar, and then we will have a brown shirt. So that means there'll be 3 colors that we'll be going with here. So the first thing we'll do is start off with our flesh colored clay. And we will be connecting that with our brown colored clay. And one thing that you might want to keep in mind is you might want to have some sort of a a towel to keep your fingers clean, because if you work with dark colored clay right next to light colored clay, you may contaminate the light colored clay. So I usually like to keep a nice litless cloth or a paper towel. Sometimes paper towel has fibers, but I find it's fine enough to keep the color clean between the two. So here we'll start out. We will blend this beige clay with the brown clay. You'll notice as we fuse it, it kind of gets a little fuzzy there. And again, we're just rolling the clay. And what we can do is pinch and do our same making of our little soldier, except this time we're not going to break it off from the clay, we're going to leave it intact on the clay. So there you see I've made a thumb by using that same soldier technique, except I haven't torn it off, and you can do the same thing here. You pinch it this way, you pinch it that way, give a gentle rolling motion, and you try to roll it and make the thickness vary. You see, as I look at it from the top and from the side, the tip of the finger is a little bit thicker than the base of the finger. Kind of a typical cartoony thing. And we do the same with the other finger here. I'm kind of running out of clay there, so if you want to try the different technique of breaking off our little soldier and attaching it, as we've done before, then you can do that. And there's our third finger. Now, it's an interesting, why do cartoon characters have 3 fingers? In the early days of animation, it was very time-consuming to draw all those drawings for animation. And the early animators said, well, you know, if we left off one finger, we could make a lot more drawings a lot faster. So they went, well, let's give it a try. And they did, and nobody noticed, and well, it became a convention. So now it looks perfectly fine to have a cartoon character only have 3 fingers. I think it looks great. So all of my characters only have 3 fingers. Leave off that 4th finger. So there's our little hand. Now, one thing we want to do is put on our art spectacles and take a look at things. If we look at my own hand here, you'll notice that there's a slight bulge right here where the thumb connects the hand. I talked about the hills and valleys of the hand. You know, it's a little bit thicker there. There's a bulge there. So we want to put a little padding on our cartoon hand in this area. And in order to do that, all we need to do is make a little ball, not a cylinder this time, just a little ball, and we flatten it out very subtly, and we place it right at the base of the thumb, just like our regular hand is. And then again, you smooth that out. I'm just using my thumb to smooth that out. If you feel that this is done better with a tool, you go right ahead and use a tool. So we smooth that out. We might flatten it and gently roll that on the clay. And there you have our cartoon hand. Now, if you look at the hand also, you know that it kind of bends there, and there's like this little base. So we might want to pinch that area of the hand a little bit more, make a little separation there in our hand. You see, that looks quite good. But now we have a situation that we talked about the coat and the white collar. So let's make a little white collar there. We'll take a little blob of white clay, and remember our technique of the boxing glove, where we had just enough clay to surround the arm. We'll do the same thing here. And that's all done by the judging. You know, you make all these little characters and you judge the amount of clay. Then you pinch it and you make a flat piece of clay there. Then you gently drape it around the arm. And you just kind of meet it there. And that hides up the seam between the brown clay and the beige clay, and also makes a collar, as you can see. Now we'll take some more brown clay, and we'll do exactly the same thing. We'll make a thicker tube, because now this is going to be the coat sleeve, so it's a little bit thicker. Make another tube that will completely surround the arm. We flatten it out. And then as we cover the collar like this, and then blend it in with the brown clay, it gives the illusion that there is a full white shirt underneath this brown collar of clay. And there you have it. If you want to embellish it even more, you might do something like take a little dark clay and put a little button, make a little round ball, and you press it in, and you make a button. Then you might take one of your tools, let's say a little chopstick, and you indent the button. Then you take your little poker, and you make 4 little sewing buttons there, and see how easy it is to get a little bit of detail using ways that are not like your finger, doing things that your finger cannot do. Okay, so now we have our little hand. You can be technically very accurate with your sculpture, but so much of the character of the piece is given by performance or the posing of the figure. I learned a great deal of this by animating. You see, here's a hand. It's pretty good. You've got the fingers and the thumb, but it's very stiff. This single body part can be so expressive. I mean, when you do your sculptures, you should be a little bit of an actor or a ham bone like myself, and pose the hand. This hand could be a frightened hand, a defiant hand, a hand with a point. So let's have this hand point to someone and we'll see what we mean. So obviously, if you're going to point the hand, I think it's graphically a little bit better if we turn the hand, so we show off the button there a little bit, and we'll turn the 2 fingers that are pointing inward. But instead of turning these 2 fingers identically the same way, let's leave one down a little bit. It's bent, but it's not curved. That'll add a little bit of character. The thumb will bend down, and the top finger, let's give it a little slope. Not board straight. Most people aren't board straight. And we may turn the pose of the hand that way. Now, what an interesting, expressive hand that is. It's like, look at that, you know, as opposed to look at that, you know. Have a little flair. Not everything needs to be straight. Not everything has to be uniformly turned the same way. And the question often comes up as to how to judge proportion in your pieces. And, well, how do you decide where to bend, or where the elbow is, or where the finger joints are? And of course, the answer to that is to learn anatomy. Now, there's an easy way to learn anatomy, and there's a hard way to learn anatomy. And I've done both. I prefer the easy way. And I'll tell you what I mean. When I was starting my animation career years ago, people gave me all sorts of advice. Says, if you want to learn to sculpt, then you should study Gray's Anatomy. He says, what's that? It's a book. Learn Gray's Anatomy. So I got this book, Gray's Anatomy. Gray's Anatomy is a book that is this thick, and it is a medical book that will talk to you about every single muscle and blood vessel and bone in the human body. And I looked at that, and then I went even further. I took a nursing course in anatomy, and I learned all these things. I learned where your xiphoid process is. And for your information, that is a little triangular bone at the base of the sternum. Completely unnecessary to know about, but great for cocktail party conversation. The thing that occurred to me after taking that nursing course in anatomy and looking at that book was that the things that they described, I already instinctively knew. But how could that be? And it occurred to me that it was because of comic books.
comic books. Yes, comic books. Because in a comic book, what you're doing is a tried and true technique of copying the master. The people that draw comic books are excellent artists, and they know anatomy. And if you pick up any comic book of any superhero, you will get a human figure in tights that is posed in every conceivable angle. You will see the figure from the top, from the side, from the bottom, a close-up of a foot, a close-up of a hand, every conceivable angle. And the most important part of it is that it is abbreviated. You get a sense of the form and just the essence of what the form is. The problem that I have found with complex books like Gray's Anatomy or Sculpting from Life is that while they are good techniques and good areas of study, it's extremely difficult because you're overloaded with information. If you look at my hand, for example, say, I want to sculpt this hand. Well, you look at it and you see every little crease, every little wrinkle, every little blotch of color. You see the fingerprints, you see the wrinkles, you see the changes in form. It's just, there's tons of stuff, little hairs. How do you know what the important stuff is and what the extraneous stuff is? Comic books allow you to see that because it abbreviates the form. And I'll show you what I mean. Let's draw a little comic book art here. We'll go into drawing for a moment. It's interesting because it is so similar to sculpture. So let's say we're going to continue with our arm. Now most artists will start out, do it in pencil, usually blue pencil, but they'll start out with essentially the drawn equivalent of an armature, just a couple of lines. I'll draw a line there for the main arm, then the forearm, the hand, and the finger. That could be just as well a bent piece of wire. Then they will flesh it out, and they'll put a little ball there. That'd be like putting a little ball of clay there. That represents the deltoid muscle. Over here would represent the bicep. Here are the forearm muscles here. Flesh it out for the hand. So you have these circles. You're finding the shape, much as you find the shape in a sculpture. Next, you smooth out the drawing as you smooth out the sculpture, as we saw when you put the ball on the palm of the hand. And you'll make a little smoothing outline of your hand there. Because the little balls, you figure, okay, there's the elbow. This is where the triceps are. There you have that. Once this is done, the artist usually takes the pen and then delineates what the important lines are. We'll trace over these sections again here. You can see this taking shape.